Let's talk about money, why don't we? Now, there are some doubts within the Oregon fan base where exactly the financial status lies within the walls of the Oregon Ducks football building right now. This offseason within college football, it is the ultimate pinnacle of the wild, wild west. It is Deadwood, Dakota Territory, 1876. It is lawless. There are no rules. You have a guy like Jackson Cantwell out there, never played it down in college football before, making $2 million plus from the University of Miami out there. You have a lot of money. There was an article over there at On3 with Kirby Smart saying you have guys that are getting paid monthly to stay committed to their school, once again, without having to play a single down of college football. I think the year before the House settlement, you have a lot of teams out there. A lot of teams out there that are backing the Brinks truck up and saying, this is our opportunity to maybe get ahead of the game. So are these doubts warranted as it pertains to the financials surrounding Oregon football right now? To maybe answer that question, I want to talk about maybe an internal battle as it pertains to the investment, maybe as it pertains to the money spending within Oregon football. And that battle is retainment versus recruitment. There is absolutely no doubt last year's roster, the 2025 roster, and I think the 2026 roster, Oregon is in a window. Oregon is in a national championship window. And this roster is extremely important to be able to retain. Do you notice that there were some players that I thought could have transferred out of this program that didn't? I mentioned Jade Lamar, Jay Harris specifically. Like, one of those guys is going to be RB5. RB5 next season. I think the writing was on the wall for both of those guys. And yet they are still somehow here in Eugene, Oregon. Like, you have other stacked rooms out there. Look at what they've been. Look at what Oregon's been able to recruit over there on the secondary. Look at what different position groups and how deep and how stacked that they are for this year and what the roster could look like for next year. This is a program that has recruited back-to-back top 5 classes. They have brought in as high a talent as anybody over the last couple of years. You know, I think there's some folks out there that think, all right, you pay a kid whatever coming out of high school, and that's it. You don't have to pay him again. These guys are on 1-year contracts. It's 1 year, and then we got to pay him another thing for the next year, and then another thing for the next year. Like, retainment is so huge, and I think it is an underrated aspect of building and maintaining a high-caliber college football program. I think it took a pretty sizable investment to be able to retain some of these guys on this roster. Now, Oregon, I think, speaks for itself. People want to come to Oregon. You play in the biggest games. You play for a great team. You play for great coaches. I think that certainly is a part of it. But let's call it as it is. The money is also a really big part of it in today's day and age. And retaining this roster, keeping it stacked, I think is as huge of an investment sometimes as even dropping a bag on a high-profile recruit. And in Eugene, culture is king. When you set the precedent that says, we're going to drop a couple $1 million on this player that's never played college football, and now all of a sudden he walks into a locker room, and now all of a sudden the dynamic is a little bit different. The team dynamic is a little bit different. The locker room dynamic is a little bit different. And that's the balance that college football general managers, that college football head coaches have to be able to handle and have to be able to balance themselves. I think Dan really values the culture of this locker room. I think Dan really values the culture of this team. If you go out and drop a humongous bag on one player, what does that say about what you're willing to do? What does that say about your culture? What does that say about kind of the back end on your locker room? I think for some teams, it could certainly work. For other teams, it might not work. I think there's teams out there that are in a little bit of desperation mode right now when it comes to the future, when it comes to recruiting. And I think they're willing to drop that significant sum of cash right now because they think what's going to happen in the future where maybe we aren't as successful on the field, and now maybe things are a little bit on a more of an even playing field. I think Oregon has confidence in the long-term process. I think Oregon has a lot of confidence in their roster going forward, and that kind of goes to my first point. Dan Lanning has installed a fantastic culture, and he doesn't want to risk that culture by going out and getting just one guy. Now, do I think one guy could tear down the culture that Dan Lanning has been built? No, but it can maybe start to form a little bit of a trend, start to form a little bit of a precedent. Sometimes the right guys are maybe more important than the guys with the most stars and maybe the guys that are valued with the most financial as well. And like 2026 was always going to be a smaller class. You go back to the 2024, that was a huge class. 27 signees, 27 commitments that year. 2 players have transferred out. I think Gatlin Bear was a part of that class. So you know, that's what that leaves you, about 23, 24 kids that are on this roster. That's a big bulk. That's a big bulk of kids. Last year, you had 18 players. I expected this class to be around the 18 to 20 mark. And Oregon's sitting there with 7 already. So basically that leaves room for them to sign 10, 12, 13 more players. And I think, you know, despite maybe some of these recruiting losses and maybe the way things are trending, like, for example, Tommy Toffee today committing over to Cal. Yeah, that sucks. It stinks. Maybe Oregon will be in it. Maybe they won't. And it's maybe just another recruiting loss, and losing it to another lower quality program certainly stings, but I think Oregon can certainly be in a really good position to sign a lot of high quality players. Will they be a top 5 class when all is said and done? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. But I always thought that this 2026 class, I think Marshall and Dan were always going to be able to be selective on some of their investments and where they spend their money for this 2026 class going forward. Oregon, no doubt, they are in a national championship window, and I think the investment has maybe been put on retainment over more than recruitment necessarily. But what do we know about great football programs? They can retain players, and they can also recruit the very best players as well. So it's not like there's zero concern. You know, there, of course, is a little bit of concern, and I've talked about it many times. June is really going to set the stage on what the future of the program and how good and how high that they can maintain this. But, man, this window that they're in right now and that investment to keep this roster around cannot, I repeat, cannot be overstated.